friends, and welcome back to my channel. Today we are going to be talking about the Monstera Standellyana. This is a plant I have had in my collection for several years, and to be honest, for the longest time I was not feeling it, but I think I've finally gotten a handle on it and I am absolutely loving it now. So I wanted to share it with you how I care for it. If you're new here and you don't know me already, my name is Emma and I make houseplanty content all over the internet. So if you want to follow along with my houseplanty journey and maybe learn something along the way, stick around, watch some more of my videos, and subscribe to my channel. If you're not new here, thank you so much for coming back. I really appreciate it. Let's dive on in to the plant care. So the Monstera Standellyana, no surprise, is a Monstera, but it is unlike any other Monstera I have ever grown before. It is commonly miscalled a philodendron as well because of its nickname, philodendron cobra. Not quite sure where they got that from. Its other nickname, oddly enough, is called the 5 holes plant, which is really weird because unlike most other Monsteras, it does not split its leaves. They do not grow fenestrations. They stay solid even through maturity. So it's a bit of an odd one. It is a naturally variegated plant. All of the leaves do have some bits of variegation, ranging from sort of big swaths like that to more speckled variegation as well. So if you see something being sold as a variegated Monstera Standellyana and raising the price just because it's got variegation, might not be the best opportunity. Sometimes they are called variegated because they do have higher variegation. Mine has fairly low variegation, or there's an Aurea which has yellow variegation instead of the cream. So there are other options that are a bit more expensive. I've had this plant for so long, or some iteration of it for literally years at this point, and this is kind of where we are. So patience is really key when it comes to these because they can be very slow growers and very slow propagators as well. So you do need patience, but in the end, they aren't terribly difficult. And with these easy care tips, I can help you keep yours happy and healthy. Light-wise, they prefer lots and lots of bright indirect light. Some dappled sun is okay. They're originally from the rainforest and they climb up things, and so they're used to getting dappled sunlight throughout the day. Any sort of harsh afternoon sun, like full sun beating down on it, is not gonna do this plant any favors, and it can burn the leaves. If you must have it in some sort of sun, some early morning sun or very late afternoon sun is fine, because the sun isn't as harsh and hot during those hours, so it can handle it a little bit better. If you're not giving it enough light, it will grow a whole lot slower and a whole lot leggier as well. You can kind of see where mine is at the top up here. It's reaching for more light because it's not in the absolute brightest of spots up there, whereas down here it is a lot more compact internodally, and so I need to probably put this in a slightly brighter spot. Right now, it is about 2-ish meters away from a southwest facing window, and it does get some sun, very little in the afternoons in the winter, but for the most part, it is bright indirect light, maybe even medium indirect light because I live in the UK and it's cloudy most of the time. So it's not getting tons and tons of light, but it seems to be happy enough. It's not under any grow light or anything, and it's still producing beautiful big leaves. So I think I'm probably gonna keep it where it is for a while and maybe chop and prop that top bit off. It is best to water Monstera Standellyana when their soil is dry, 50 or 75% of the way down in the pot. So there-ish. And they'll like that the best. They don't want to dry out completely, but they also don't want to sit super wet. When you do water them, make sure you water them fully, thoroughly saturate the soil, and then let it drain out the bottom, because you don't want it sitting in a puddle of water at the bottom because that's gonna lead to root rot and your plant will likely die. So you do have to make sure not to let it sit in the water for too long. Of course, with this sort of soil dryness sort of watering, you're going to be watering more in the spring and summer and the growing months than you are in the autumn and winter, because the plant is actively growing and using more water. It's probably warmer and probably drier as well. So the water is evaporating off the soil and it will dry out faster. So keep that in mind. I personally don't think you should go off of time-based system because it is different for everybody in everybody's home environments. So I can't really recommend doing it. So I can't really recommend that sort of system. I do water mine a little bit differently to that. I don't tend to water the soil of my plant all that much because I have mine on a sphagnum moss pole. And sphagnum moss is a porous material and it will soak up tons of water, and so I try to keep that quite moist instead because it's got tons of roots growing through the back, and so I want to keep them happy and hydrated. I tend to water this one every 3 or 4 days at the minute in winter. It definitely goes up in summer to maybe every day, every other day. I've not been the best about keeping them fully moist all the time, but I'm trying to stay on top of it. So as you can see, the pole is quite moist at the minute and I'm not worried about it. How I water it is I put a cup on top of here, and the plastic cup has holes in the bottom of it, very, very small, pinpoint holes. And the water will slowly seep down through those holes into the moss pole, so it lets it gradually get quite wet. And you do need to do a little bit of trial and error with this because you need to know how much water it will take to get down to the bottom of the pole without getting the soil too soaking wet and letting it sit just constantly in the water, because it won't like that and it can cause root rot. So it does take some experimentation, but once you get the hang of it, it's probably the easiest way to water these if you've got them on a sort of sphagnum moss pole. Monstera Standelyanas like it quite warm, warmer than a lot of my other houseplants. They much prefer the warmer range. Ideally somewhere between 20 and 27 degrees Celsius, or 70 to 85 Fahrenheit. That is their ideal. Typically your home should be okay, except in winter. Then you need to keep an eye on it a little bit more. It can drop lower and the plant will be fine, but anything below 12 Celsius or 55 Fahrenheit, your plant can go dormant and actually suffer stunted growth. So do be careful. Try and keep your home above 12, at the very, very least. But as long as you're comfortable in your home, generally it should be fine. They do also like the humidity on a bit of the higher side. Their ideal is between 55 and 80%. They are from the tropical rainforest after all, so they're used to high humidity in their natural home environment. That's how they like to grow. Personally, my home tends to be quite humid naturally, 60%. Might have something to do with all of the plants I have, or just generally living in a bit more of a damp country. This one is living in my bedroom, which we are currently trying to keep at about 50%, which I know is technically a little bit too low for this one, but I don't think it's minding really. It's not producing curly growth or crisping the edges too much, so I'm not really worried about it. If you do need to boost humidity for this one, the best way to do it would be with a humidifier. You could also put it on a pebble tray or group it with other plants, but the most surefire way to boost humidity is through a humidifier. So maybe get one if you feel like you have lots of tropical plants that need a bit more of a boost in that area. Monstera Standelyanas don't need all that much fertilizer. Probably fertilize it about once a month in the growing season, so less than you would a lot of your other plants. You can continue fertilizing into the autumn and winter period if your plant is still growing. Mine is still growing, obviously, so I'm continuing to fertilize. But if you notice that your plant's growth is slowing or stopping, I'd recommend stopping fertilizing as well, because you don't want to over fertilize it while it's not actively growing. So if your plant isn't growing, don't fertilize it. If it's still growing, you can keep going. I personally recommend liquid gold leaf fertilizer. That's my favorite fertilizer of all time. I think my plants really like it as well. And that is a houseplant specific fertilizer, so I don't need to dilute it. If you're using all-purpose fertilizer, I'd probably suggest diluting it to half strength just because like all-purpose fertilizers tend to be a bit stronger than houseplant focused fertilizers and can burn the roots of your plant if you're not too careful. So just keep that in mind. Because I have mine on a moss pole and I water mostly through the moss pole, I fertilize this one slightly differently. I think about once a week I fill the cup on top of it with fertilizer water instead of just normal water. Sometimes more than that in the spring and summer if it's growing like quite quickly, but typically I try and do it about once a week. And I let the fertilizer go down through the moss because there's roots in here and they want nutrients as well. So giving them the nutrient water is not a bad shout. So if you have your Monstera Standelyana on a moss pole like this, you can definitely water the sphagnum moss with fertilizer water. A well-draining soil mix is super important for these ones. I would ideally suggest something with like bark and perlite in it because that will provide really good drainage and aeration to the soil. A good aeroid mix should be fine, but especially if you have yours on a moss pole, like a sphagnum pole, and you're watering through that, you do not want your soil to be super dense because it'll hold water around the roots and they won't like it, especially because we're watering a bit more often. So when I put my plants on poles like this, I will add extra bark to an aeroid mix to make it super extra chunky and super more well draining in order to like make sure it's not getting overwatered when I water it. In general, I tend to find them slower growing as well, so you probably won't need to repot that much. And especially if you have yours on a moss pole and the roots are growing more into the moss pole, it's probably not gaining new roots into the pot at the bottom that much. So you won't need to repot all that often. Maybe like once a year, every other year, once it's gotten established. Of course, you're gonna do it more when it's younger and it's growing in pot size. But I feel like once it gets to about this size, I'm not planning on changing the pot anytime soon. I think this is about a 14 or 16 centimeter pot. And it's perfectly happy in here, and I don't think I'm gonna change it at all because it's definitely not ready. But one thing to note is whenever you do repot, you wanna make sure you're giving it something with drainage holes because, like I said before, those are really important so we don't get root rot. So technically Monstera Standelyanas are epiphytes, meaning that they grow climbing trees and other supports in the tropical rainforest. So they're pretty much made to climb. You won't find them in a sort of hanging basket style like you might with some other sorts of plants like the Adansonii or something like that. It pretty much only gets sold on some sort of support, whether that be a moss pole like this, a round moss pole, or even coir poles. There's benefits to each of those, but I've personally found that the D-shaped poles work the best for me in my home because the plastic on the back keeps the moss extra moist, and so I don't need to worry about watering it every day. It doesn't dry out as fast, and I think the roots really love it in there. They're definitely growing throughout, and like this is definitely attached to the pole. I cannot move this, and it is not strapped here. Like it's stuck. So it is very, very happy in its place and I wouldn't want it any other way. It is, however, quite important that you do stay on top of keeping it moist because if you've got a sphagnum moss pole like this, there's roots inside of that. And so if you underwater that moss and let it get too dry too often, it's like you're underwatering the entire plant. So it is a little bit more of a, what's the word? A chore? Commitment. It is a little bit more of a commitment, but I honestly think it's worth it because it has helped my plant turn into something that I really, really love. It used to be on a self-watering moss pole and I didn't like those for a myriad of reasons. I've got whole videos on why I don't like those, so check those out if that's something that you're interested in. But yeah, I think it's just so much happier now that it's in this situation and it has turned into maybe not one of my favorite plants in my collection, but one that I really, really love and I'm happy to see on a regular basis. So Monstera Standelyana are easy to prop, but they are slow. Probably one of the slowest propagating plants that I have experienced. I I'm pretty sure I got cuttings of this plant in 2019 and it is only this big now, and I added another big section since, so I think it'd probably be only half the size had I not added that extra section. So it takes its sweet time. Just be prepared for patience being needed while you're propping it. The best way to propagate it is to take some clean scissors or a knife and cut just below a node. You'll probably see some aerial roots starting to form already because they have them naturally. So you want to cut below that. Once you cut it, I personally would suggest putting it in a prop box or something like that where you can give it a really high amount of humidity, because that will help it prop a little bit faster. In general, they're going to prop slowly still anyways, so it's just something to be aware of. But like giving it high humidity is like giving it everything it could possibly have, as well as light. They're gonna need a lot of light to prop. And it'll take some time, but in the end it'll be worth it because you'll have hopefully a gorgeous plant like this in 4 years time. Yay! Unfortunately, Monstera Standelyanana are toxic to humans and pets like cats and dogs, so ideally keep it out of reach of them and children. You don't want anyone ingesting this plant. If ingested, it can cause like irritation to like the throat, mouth, and stomach, as well as nausea and other gastrointestinal issues, which I'm not going to get into in this video, but just be aware that that is a possibility and don't let anyone nibble on this plant. So that is it. Those are all of my tips and tricks on how to take care of the gorgeous Monstera Standelyanana. I really hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope it help keep your Monstera Standelyanana happy and healthy. And if you weren't sure whether or not you wanted to get one, I think it's worth a try. Definitely go for it. If you want a big plant though, buy a big plant because it takes ages to freaking grow. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up down below and leave a comment on other houseplanty things you'd like me to talk about in the future, and subscribe for more. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye!